Hi everyone, Dr. Monette here to talk to you about middle childhood social emotional development. So, what I'm going to have you do in just a minute is I'm going to want you to watch this video of the Little Rascals. The Little Rascals is the idealistic view of what happens in middle childhood. So, as you watch this video, I want you to think of some of the characteristics that you see, and in just a minute, I will ask you questions about the things that you see. So, in this video, a couple of things that I saw were things like excluding girls, the He-Man Woman Haters Club. That is a very big social emotional characteristic of this middle childhood age because boys play with boys and girls play with girls. Gender has a big part to this. But also, when it comes to things like relational aggression, whether it is a negative type of aggression or a positive type of aggression. So, for instance, the bullies in this picture as well, are negatively kept away. Whereas the characteristics of the group were they were together, they were brothers, they were in a group, they even had their own little democracy. So you had Spanky, who was the president, you had a note taker, and you also had someone to um, start the meeting and to hold the basic fundamentals of a meeting. So holding the minutes, calling everybody to attention, introducing the speaker, and things like that. So there's a lot of characteristics that we can see of how they have learned through vicarious learning. So if we go back to Vygotsky and Bandura there, they learn these actions through watching adults. How else would they have gotten the understanding of the minutes and the president and things like that? So during this stage of development, they're moving beyond their basic needs. So when they were in early childhood, they really were focused on understanding their world and they were really focusing on managing their emotions. Now they're starting to change a little bit, but it really is the time before the storm. So it's called the latency period, as Freud would explain. And this occurs from about first grade, kindergarten, first grade, up into about sixth grade when puberty is about to start. And this is a time of calm. And all of their sexual interest and things are pretty much, they're very stagnant. It's calm. They're not necessarily interested in the opposite sex or in romantic relationships. So their sexual drives are expressed through friends, clubs, school, fun, and problem solving. So, for instance, if we go back to the Little Rascals a minute ago, they were focused on their friends and their club and their activity of being a race car driver. So that's another characteristic of middle childhood as well, is that they thought, if you've ever seen the Little Rascals movie, they thought that the race car driver was a man. But at the end of the movie, they find out the gender of that race car driver. So there's these certain things that they think that boys can do and girls can do. But they really express this through their friends and their clubs and their school and their fun and problem solving abilities. At this age, also, cultural expectations take precedence, and their ability to master certain skills is very, very important. At this age, children want to feel like they're competent, that they're able to achieve things. And they also become very aware of what they're good at and what they're not good at. And since they're in the school age, and we know all about report cards and testing and things like that, children learn very much about what they're good at and not good at school wise through those grades, through who gets perfect attendance awards, who gets honor roll, who is the most popular, and things like that. So they become very aware of where they fit in regard to these different social things that are happening at school, and also in regards to their self worth, their competence, their intelligence. Also, at this age, they learn skills by practicing. This is very much where you see especially like in a PE setting, they're going to continue to practice those skills. So if we go back and think about that basketball video where we were watching them practicing to dribble, you don't just learn how to dribble the first time, or you don't learn how to do it overnight. You have to continuously practice. And at the beginning, they may be practicing with two hands and they have a two-hand dribble. And then later they have a one-hand dribble. And then later on, you would add on to that to where they're walking and dribbling. And then when you're combining it with another move. Same thing with learning a skill in math. You have to you have to understand what numbers are before you can add numbers, before you can subtract, and then multiply and divide. You learn how to add before you learn how to multiply, and vice versa. So they're very much focused on what makes them them, and also what other people that are like them are capable of doing. So during this stage, we got to talk about Erikson and his industry versus inferiority, which is pretty much what we just kind of talked about a minute ago. And this is where children who successfully master things feel industrious, meaning they think they can like the little engine that could. But if they don't master these things, it can lead to feelings of incompetence. They can feel like they're inferior or not self-worthy. And it can cause them to have future failures later on. So whenever I think about Erikson's stage of industry versus inferiority, I always think about Pooh Bear and Eeyore. Eeyore is very much in the inferior stage. He's always melancholy. He's always sulking. He never really wants to do anything because he doesn't think that he's capable. But Tigger, on the other hand, is very industrious. He's always bouncing around, telling them to come on. He's encouraging them. So if you kind of think about this as the Tigger Eeyore thing, the ones who are industrious are the ones that keep trying, even though they may fail, but they keep going, or they may try it a new way. And then inferior would be on the Eeyore side, where they don't think that they're capable of doing things. Now, during this age, it is really important for us to be positive, supportive, and to give them successful experiences, because everybody needs a chance to feel like they're capable of doing something, even if it's not academic in nature. So this is where things like being good at sports or being good at art or being good at music becomes the precedence of what a lot of children like. If it's something that they feel that they're not good at, they're not going to be like, ooh, I love it. They're going to be like, it's maybe not my favorite thing. And a lot of times at this age, they'll have a tendency of saying, well, my favorite thing at school is this, and my least favorite thing at school is this. However, that least favorite thing could be something that is favorite later if they had the opportunity to try it in new ways, or if they were able to practice that skill. Because again, you don't learn skills overnight. There's nothing natural or to where you could just absorb the magic powers. You have to be able to practice this. So we want to make sure that children have positive support when they learn. We want to talk about what they can do so that they can build on those, because learning is a building process. We also want to support them when they're making friends, when they're participating in their social world, so taking turns talking, how to interact, how to be nice to each other, and then more independence. We want to give them those opportunities to try to tie their shoe, to try to zip their jackets on their own so that they can feel it, they can do it. Now, children that have negative or no support, they do start to feel inferior because they may look at their peers and say, well, they can do it, why can't I do it? But it's also based off of the experiences for them to try. So when we were talking about tying shoes in early childhood, children that can tie their shoes, it's because they had the opportunity to do it. But children that come into the middle ages and still can't tie their shoe, it's most likely because they haven't had the opportunity to try. However, if you work with them and you show them how to tie their shoe, or you show them how to do a math problem or how to dribble or whatever it may be, they're going to be more confident with it. Because when you feel like you can't do something, you're not very confident. You're not like, I'm ready to fail today. You're more thinking, I'm going to do what I'm good at and maybe not do the things that I know I'm going to be bad at. But the way that you get better at something is practice. So we want to build their confidence so that they are capable of doing things that maybe they don't think they're so great at. So we do have to go back and talk about the 3 dimensions of self-concept. So I asked you last class about these, and self-image, again, that is how somebody perceives their self. And then we have ideal self, and this is where a person, what they would like to be. So at this age, they're starting to think a little bit more abstractly. So they're thinking, well, this is who I am, or this is how I perceive myself, but this is how I would like to be. How I would like to be. And they're trying to figure out how to get to that. And sometimes they're successful, which makes them industrious. And sometimes they're not successful in being the person they want to be, so they become inferior. And then they feel like they have to find something else. So during this time, there's a lot of influx. It's kind of like hills and valleys. So you're doing a really good job, and you're industrious, and then you hit that valley, and then you're all of a sudden you feel inferior, and then you're back up and back down. But it all depends on your experiences and the confidence and motivation that you're given to be good at these certain things. And then we have self esteem. And this is how one feels and judges oneself. And self esteem comes from that feedback that they get from other people. So if somebody thinks that they're good at something and they're up on top of their hill, and then somebody goes, I don't think you're so good at it, then they're going to hit that valley and they're going to go into that inferiority until somebody goes, ooh, I like what you did. And then they're going to go back up on that hill until somebody makes them feel like they're not. And then they're going to go back down into that valley. So industry versus inferiority is really that roller coaster ride of the hills and the valleys where I'm good at it, I'm confident, and then something happens and you go down into the valley and you begin to feel inferior until somebody brings you out of that inferiority state, or until you realize that it doesn't matter what other people think and you're going to try to be better on your own. So friendships and peers are really, really important during this age group. And relationships with peers and friends are, like I said, they're very crucial, but there's positive friends and then there's negative friends. And depending on those different peer groups and what's going on in them, it's going to have a big impact on children as they develop socially and emotionally. So during this age, there's a couple of functions of friends. Well, one, it's to help children understand behavioral norms and learn skills for how to interact with people successfully. So, being in that school setting, being at recess, being at the playground, being in Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, whatever it may be, is teaching them how to interact in a positive way. Because if you go into a group and you're loud and you're hitting people, no one's going to want to be around you. So, it teaches you ways of acting and also showing you a model. So, they're vicariously learning again what's acceptable, how to be popular, how to be liked, and things like that. It also provides children with people to identify with who are like themselves. So, at the beginning in early childhood, they're really focused on family and siblings, but later they start to care more about their friends. So, finding people that are like them is crucial because everybody wants to feel like they belong. Everybody wants to feel like they're confident, they're competent in who they are as people. So, finding people that like things that they like or have commonalities with them is very, very important at this age. It also provides them with support with transitions and family disruptions. So, moving to a new class, having friends from the year before in there is very helpful. But also, if you're having trouble at home, having somebody to talk to that's not a family member is also a good function of friends. And then also learning how to resolve conflict. So, understanding that you just don't stop a friendship when things don't go right or when somebody wants to play something you don't. So, learning how to agree to disagree, learning how to come back and talk to somebody at a different time when you're mad. So, those are all skills. But again, it's all based off of the practice, and it's also based off of that Broff and Brenner context of what you've been taught your entire life and how that's going to transpose on your friendships. So there's a couple of different types of friendships. There's cliques and then there's crowds. Cliques are relatively small and it can be between 3 children and 12 children. And the friendships are based on groups. Predominantly, this does happen in childhood, but cliques can carry over into adolescence, especially middle school and high school. But a lot of times, cliques turn into crowds or cliques change up, and you may change groups as you go around and you learn how to perform in these different contexts or these different peer groups. Now, crowds are less intimate, they're loosely organized, and the members may or may not interact with each other. So, our class is an example of a crowd. So, we're less intimate, which means that we don't necessarily know all that much about each other unless we play on a team together. And then we may know each other a little bit more. So, within a crowd, there can be cliques as well. And affiliations with a larger crowd does become more prominent in adolescence. So I'm part of this school, I'm part of this climate, I'm part of this grade. So a grade and a school would be a crowd, whereas a clique may be like a little group that really hangs out with each other. Just kind of depends. There's also something known as formal and informal groups. So a formal group would be an organization. So that would be any of your sports, your church groups, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, any type of activity where everybody is there for a common purpose. So SGA, yearbook, newspaper, all those things would be an example of a formal peer group. Informal peer groups, on the other hand, would be things that are just common friendships based off of the interests that you have and that you found out about each other. Now, during this age, something that we really do have to talk about is peer acceptance and rejection. So we have what's known as popular children, rejected children, controversial children, and neglected children. Now, popular children, they're highly rated by their peers, and their peers really have an interest in what that person is doing. Now, this could be because they're pro-social, which means they get along with a lot of people, or it could be antisocial, as in maybe the people fear them. So it kind of depends, and it can go either way in the social spectrum. So it can be pro or anti. But typically, these are people that the other peers want to be accepted by because there's something about them, whether it be they're a positive person or a negative person. And then rejected children, these children are actively disliked by peers. Now, they can be aggressive, immature, socially unskilled, or socially wary or withdrawn. And these are the ones that the kids have a tendency of isolating. They don't necessarily want to be associated with that person because then other people may think those things about them. And then you have your controversial children. Now, these get mixed reviews from peers because they may have positive and negative social behaviors. So one day you may want to interact with them, and then another day you may not want to interact with them. And then neglected children, these are the ones that are not very popular. They interact less with peers, and this lack of noticeability makes it difficult for them to obtain a good peer assessment of their behavior because no one really talks to them. So this may be somebody that sits by themselves and nobody really talks to them because they don't talk. Not because they're controversial or not because they're rejected because they're immature, but just because they don't really come out and talk or try to interact with people. But they really don't know. But some neglected children were rejected children at one time too. Maybe they came in and people didn't really accept them, so they just kind of went and did their own thing. Now, during this age, friendships among boys and girls is very, very different. However, there are some commonalities. So, boys, for instance, they emphasize reciprocity, which means boys, they get something back and forth from each other. So, it may be sports related, like I'm going to play this and you're going to play with me so that we can do this together type thing. And they describe friends with interests involved. So if we go back to the Little Rascals video just a minute ago, they were all part of the He-Man Woman Haters Club. They were part of this organization, and they were also focused on racing. And that was one of their big things that they had in common. Now, boys do report more physical victimizations in their altercations with friends. And this is oftentimes because boys roughhouse. And we all know about it. It's all fun and games until someone gets hurt. And oftentimes that happens. So things like I didn't mean to or I was just playing will come out still like it did in early childhood because they don't realize that they're playing too rough. But that's the way that boys typically see interactions among each other. Now, girls, they focus on what they can receive from friends. So it's more about what can my friend give me instead of how can we work together in terms of the boys. Now, they describe their same sex friends with adjectives. So boys focus more on interests, girls focus more on adjectives such as she's nice to me, or she's sweet, or she's pretty. And they report more intimate exchanges in their friendships because it's more based off of talking and interacting in that way and what the friends do for each other, such as she's nice to me, so I like to hang out with her. And she's nice to me because she listens to me. Now, they report more relational victimization in their friendships. So, boys are more out to have physical victimizations, girls are more out to have relational. So, when someone's mad at them, they may ignore me, or I'm not sitting with you today, or I'm not your friend anymore. Whereas boys are more out to wrestle it out or have a race or something to work out their problems. Now, during this parent-child relationships are very, very different than they were in early childhood. So, when they're younger, they focus more on their family and especially their parents and their siblings. But as they get older, they begin to spend less time with their parents because they're starting to get to that where they care more about their friends than anybody else. Now, one of the big reasons that they spend less time with their parents is because they're involved in more activities. So they may have Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, or they may have a club after school, or they may go to a sport, or they may go to theater, or whatever it may be. So when the children are at home, they still don't spend that much time interacting directly with their parents because not only do they maybe have an outside thing that they have to do, but they're also doing chores, playing with their siblings. They may be doing homework. They may be watching TV. Now, depending on the cultures, and this is a big thing that pops up, especially in South Carolina, there are some non Western societies where children begin entering into the workforce and begin to contribute to the stability of the family. Now, in South Carolina, we have a lot of farms, and we have some populations called migrant farm workers. And what they do is, as the crops change from state to state, they migrate and they change with the different farms and what's growing so that they can keep work. Now, when the children get home from school, a lot of times they'll go and they'll help their parents picking the fruit or putting it in boxes or whatever it may be. Same thing with some children. They may babysit their siblings when they go home so their parents can work. And that helps contribute to the stability of the family. Or they may go help their family clean houses or wash cars or whatever it would be. So not only are they now have all this homework and they may have an extracurricular activity, they may also be helping to meet the needs of the family. Now, a big thing that happens at this age is something called a stereotype. And a stereotype is a picture that we have in our head about a person or a group of people based on the actions or the behaviors of others that are similar. So, what I want you to do is I want you to think about middle childhood age children. So, I want you to think of first graders to sixth graders, and I want you to jot down a couple of things about what are some of the games that they play. So, what are some games that boys play, and what are some games that girls play? And then I also want you to think about some of the games that they may play together at this age range. So, second to sixth grade, what are some of the games that boys play? What are some of the games that girls play? And then what are some of the games that they play together? So, some of the things that I think of when I think of this is boys, primarily, they like to play things like tag or King of the Mountain. They may play Red Rover and things like that. Now, girls, on the other hand, typically are doing things like jump rope. They may be playing hopscotch. They may be playing with hula hoops or something, or on the swings. Now, together, some things that they may play like the hand clapping game together. They may play Red Rover together. Sometimes you can see boys and girls interacting, especially with like double dutch, where the boys are swinging the ropes for the girls. Sometimes you may see them playing tag together, but primarily the boys are kind of going after the boys and the girls are still going after the girls because boys typically may be a little bit faster. But again, this is because boys are a little stereotypically are known to run a little bit faster, be able to play, be a little bit more athletic. But again, it all depends on their environments and their families and what they're exposed to. But you will at times see some of this carry over into different gender groups as well. So, gender typing is a big thing to think about as parents and maybe even aunts and uncles or future parents. And what this does is if we kind of look at some of the pictures here, there's some top characteristics of males and females. And then over here we have things, and these are typical books you would see if you go to Barnes & Noble or Books A Million that boys would see and girls would see. So if you kind of went through the aisles, you would see a lot of pink and purple for girls, and you'd see a lot of things about love and makeup and fashion for girls. But boys, they're focused more on how to be smart, or how to make money, or how to be athletic, or how to build muscles. But for girls, it's a little bit different when you go through. And it's primarily based off of these characteristics of how our society sees. But parents do play a big impact on these gender stereotyping. So, emphasis on independence in industry is typically more focused on boys than it is for girls. However, it needs to be on both ends of the spectrum because girls, if we go back and we think about in the 30s and the 40s, the women stayed at home and the men went to work. There's been a giant shift and change. However, our society still kind of focuses on girls being dependent instead of independent, but it's starting to change. But if you go and you look at some of the books and some of the movies and things, it still kind of shows that stereotypical norm. So parents need to be advised to review all forms of media that portray boys, girls, women, and men because there's so many different ways to perform gender. We don't all have to be this sparkly girl, and we don't have to necessarily always be this athletic male figure that we typically see. There's many different ways of acting, and there's nothing wrong about the way that any of us act. It's just how society makes people feel that they don't fit that norm category because there's so many different ways of us to be. And depending on our circumstances, there may be a time for us to be athlete, and then there may be a time for us to be artsy, and then there may be a time for us to be emotional and then strong. It just all depends on the circumstances. So what I want you to do here is I want you to look at this movie of middle childhood age children to see how they understand gender. And before I have you watch this movie, what I want you to do is I want you to think about if you were asked this question, what would you answer? So this is a male doll and a female doll. Which one takes care of the baby? Which one makes the money? Which one cleans the house? And then I want you to watch the movie. So, gender role stereotyping. We can easily let children figure out who they want to be, primarily by creating and viewing media with non-traditional gender roles. And there's lots of celebrities, but there's also people that are not celebrities out there that help their children understand that just because you're a boy does not mean that you have to dress in blue. Does not mean that you have to be an athlete. Same thing with girls. Doesn't mean that you have to wear pink and purple and tutus. A long time ago, purple was a color for boys, and blue was a color for girls. It's kind of changed since then. But it's all about now that pink and purple world. Also helping them actively mediate among what are you seeing? Why do you want to dress this way? Talking to them about that. And then also having daily reinforcement that both Non-traditional and traditional gender roles are accepted. If a girl wants to wear pink and she wants to wear bows, no problem. If a boy wants to be an athlete, no problem. But it doesn't mean that all boys and all girls have to do these things. And here's just a picture of two um, children of celebrities. So this would be Angelina Jolie's daughter. But from first chance, if I didn't have that name there, you would probably say that that was a boy and this was a girl. But this is Gwen Stefani's son. Also, at this age, something that we have to talk about a lot is fear. And fears are very, very common. And fears can be from anything based off of a child's experiences. So things like loud noises, severe pain, high places, darkness, anything like that. And if we go back to Watson and we go back to classical conditioning, which is those involuntary responses, fear is learned. So a fear of spiders, a fear of snakes, monsters under the bed, riding a roller coaster, all of these things are learned behaviors. So if your parents are afraid of spiders and they act a certain way when they see a spider, you're more out to act that way too because you've been conditioned to have that fear response. And children at this age really start to look because they're really constructing why are these people afraid of this? And they're watching these models and saying, well, if they're afraid of it, I should be afraid of it too. So being confident is a key thing because we can cause children to have fears of things that we fear as well. Now, doesn't mean that we need to be like, oh, let's go jump off this building and things like that, but within reason. So, riding a roller coaster or turning off the lights at night, going through those types of things is a big deal. Understanding and talking about it. Why would you want to do this? But also not giving them a phobia of making them go straight into total darkness or going to the biggest roller coaster or throwing a spider at them. That's going to cause something even more than the fear itself. Also, at this age, we have to talk about stress. And stress can be caused by tons of things. But primarily in this age group, so we have first graders to sixth graders, in third grade, this wonderful thing happens where third graders are now they're standardized testing. And this causes a major stress because they go from being young to using manipulatives and understanding their world to now all of your intelligence is going to be tested on this multiple choice test. And school age children recognize the importance of doing well on these, but they may learn or need to construct their knowledge in a different way than paper pencil test. So if they perceive that they're not doing well on these tests, then they may begin to worry about failing, or they may put too much stress on themselves and try to study too hard or make themselves sick. So things like school phobia, test phobia, do become a big deal as well during this age. So impacts of stress and fear. Well, one, it can have significant psychological problems. And Elkin worries that stresses in modern life can be hazardous to their well-being. I mean, all of these pressures coming down on these children is a big deal. So they have those tests, they got to learn all this content, and if I don't teach you all this content, you're not going to know what's on the test. So now the teachers and the children and the parents are all putting all this pressure of coverage, but maybe not mastery of these concepts. And then, as you all know, when you go to the next grade, it builds on what you may or may not have learned the year before. And then the next year, it does the same thing. Now, it is possible also for children to develop irrational fears or phobias that do not present any threat or danger. But again, it's all based off of these processes of what they hear and what they interact with. So if they hear horror stories from their siblings or their parents about testing and how it's bad and how everything's awful, then they may have a phobia of that too. However, if we have a conducive environment that says, well, this is what you did, look at all this progress you made. Oh, maybe we didn't do so well this time, but that's okay because look at how much you grew. Or this is what we're going to do to help you grow next time, instead of, oh, you're basic, or you're proficient, or you're advanced, or below basic, depending on the level scales of the test. But children do oftentimes, we go back to that industry versus inferiority. When they see I'm basic and my classmates are proficient, that automatically tells them that they're not keeping up with everybody. But it also takes into effect, maybe they were sick that day, or maybe they were out sick a couple of weeks because they had the flu or they had to have a surgery. Doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't know, they just didn't have that exposure or that experience or that practice to be successful. So school phobia is something that does happen, and primarily this happens starting at about third, fourth grade, and then it does go on into high school. Typically, younger children, kindergarten to second grade, they're kind of excited to go to school. They're excited to make new friends. They may be a little scared at the beginning with the separation from parents, but ultimately, they're having a lot of fun and they're learning a lot of new things. Whereas when you get to third, going up into high school, everything becomes very standardized, very test driven at times, and children develop to have a fear, especially when they don't feel like they're successful. So children who have this fear typically refuse to go to school, and because they refuse to go to school, it causes them to fall behind and lose contact with their friends. And then children that refuse to go to school may be afraid to leave their parents, and that's typically with the younger ages, but it could also occur from bullying. They may also be afraid to be around other children because they may have anxiety. Oftentimes, disorders such as autism may cause this, to where they need to be more in a small group environment where there's not a lot of noise or they're not overstimulated. So that could be a reason they don't like to go to school as well. Or they may be afraid that they're going to get sick or germs. So they might have obsessive compulsive disorder, and that can cause school phobia as well. But again, it all depends on their context and their environment. And all of these are completely possible of being not cured, but overcome with strategies and accommodations. But it has to be aware, you have to be aware of what these things are to make a difference in the child and to help the parents see how that they can help and how the school can help in all of that. So the consequences of school phobia for children can be quite severe. However, it's important to identify and address the root cause. Is it that bullying is happening? Is it that they feel like they have no friends? Is it that they're afraid that they're going to get sick? Do they need to be in a small group environment? So all of these can be overcome. However, understanding the initial problem is very, very important. So how can we help overcome stress and fear at school? Well, one, teaching, modeling, and practicing strategies is very, very important. Helping children understand how to manage their time so that they don't run out of time, how to organize their thoughts, how to learn, how they learn best, and study strategies. They do not naturally know these things and how to use them efficiently. So a lot of us probably, when we were younger, were taught to make things like flashcards. Flashcards are an ineffective strategy when you have to apply content. Now, if you're memorizing facts and dates and multiplication tables for a fact test, flashcards would be effective. However, if you had to write an essay on a social studies concept, memorizing facts and dates isn't going to help you. So you have to know when to use what. But children do not understand that. They're very young at this age and they're not quite sure what to do. Also, something that's very important is listening to students' concerns, understanding why they may be fearful or stressed. If we don't listen and show that we care, we're not going to be able to help them at all. Also, monitoring, observing, and documenting behavior is very important as well, socially and academic. So how are they getting along with their peers and how are they doing in the field that they're in. Referring outside sources. So they may need tutoring, they may need a counselor, they may need a doctor. And a lot of these, we're talking about middle age, but these apply to adults as well. So if they're having trouble with, they could have work phobia. These are very important things. So why are they so afraid? Why are they not getting along? How can we help them? How can we help them with time management and things like that? So, also speaking to parents and guardians about how to help people that are stressed and fearful of school. So, it takes a village when it comes to helping people overcome things. So, talking to parents, talking to the school, talking to the child, all of these are very, very important. But it's kind of hard to help somebody when you don't talk to the people that they're around and talk to the person themselves. And then also the last one, having a warm and open environment free of biases, stereotypes, and bullying, and modeling appropriate behavior and conflict resolutions. Now, again, this is very relevant to any job that some of you may have in the future. Having an environment where people feel that their thoughts and their feelings and accepting them for who they are as people is very, very important. And if somebody doesn't quite know how to interact with somebody, maybe they have a belief and somebody else has another belief and they are conflicted, teaching them how to agree to disagree is very, very important. So here's where I am going to end us for today. And I'm going to ask you one more question before we go, which is going to focus on how can you use what you have learned about middle childhood in your future career. So if you're going to be working with little children, how might you be able to use your knowledge of school phobia and fear and stress to work with the younger children? Same thing with if you want to work with middle, adolescents, or adults. So, how can we use what we've learned in regard to stress, fear, and phobias, whether it be school phobia or work phobia, to help somebody overcome these obstacles